what I've learned in the long term is we often don't just succeed or fail. Often it's a little bit of both all the time. And the reason that we succeed and fail is because you're trying something really hard. And ultimately, if you're not failing, if you're not making mistakes, then you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough.
Hi, I'm Helen Tuffer, host of HSBC's Power Up podcast, a podcast all about helping people to perform at their best. And today I'm going to be talking to Bonita Norris, mountaineer, author and inspirational speaker, about how goals helped her to climb to the top of Everest and become the youngest British woman to climb the world's highest peak. Bonita, welcome to the Power Up podcast.
Thank you, Helen.
We like to start all of our conversations asking our guests what is powering them up at the moment. So what is powering you up?
I am really lucky at the moment. I'm getting to share my story a lot with different teams and leaders. Yeah, it's powering me up that I'm getting to share the things that I've learned in the mountains and translate those learnings so that it can help people in their everyday lives. And getting messages on social media and stuff from people that have actually made like a real world difference after hearing me speak has just been amazing.
Well, I know our listeners are going to be part of that and learning from you. So this passion for mountaineering, what was the spark that started it?
It's quite embarrassing, actually. I was 20 years old. I was at university. I had never climbed a mountain before. I was on my sofa in my student house watching TV, and a friend of mine rang me up and invited me to a lecture about mountaineering. And, you know, my response was like, why? And she said, well, there might be some hot guys there. So it is to my shame that the reason I'm sitting here with you today is because I thought I was going to go and find a hot man at a lecture. And I didn't fall in love with, any guys that night, but I did fall in love with the mountains. I listened to two climbers described how they had just reached the top of Everest. And in that moment, my whole life was mapped out for me. I thought, that is what I need to do. There's nothing else that matters. I need to go and climb that mountain. And there was one thing they said, which really just got me so excited. And it was that when they got to the top of Everest, they could see the curvature of the earth. And I thought that was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. And so I left that room with this vision that that's what I want to do. And that's the sight that I want to see at the end.
I love this idea that one evening can change your life. Like one conversation that you listen to, one event that you attend can give you like a different perspective on the world and where you can work. I also like the idea that imagine they weren't talking about mountaineering. Like imagine they were talking about being a chef or some other profession. You could have been doing anything, but that was the moment that mountains became your thing.
If I'd have just stayed on the sofa that night and watched TV, I think it was like my sliding doors moment.
Yeah.
My whole life today is because of being curious, not in this way that I expected, but just saying yes to things. And I think I fall into this trap of pigeonholing myself, deciding, I won't like that, or I won't be good at that, so there's no point trying. That moment taught me that you don't know what passion in life you're going to have if you don't go out and try new things. So you have to be curious, whatever point in life you're at, and you have to say yes to things.
So you go away from that evening, the curvature of the earth, these inspiring stories, and you decide, I'm going to climb a mountain. Not just any mountain. I mean, there are lots of mountains. You decided you were going to climb Everest. So that's quite a big mountain. That's quite a big vision. How do you make that like real in your mind? How do you create a vision that helps you move forward from that moment to the top of a mountain?
So I spent a lot of time reading books about Everest. I spent a lot of time on the internet reading about it, became a real armchair mountaineer. But probably, the most important thing at the end of that was one day, for some reason, I found myself writing it down. And that's when I stared back at the page and I thought, whoa, I'm serious about this. Like, do I really think I could climb Everest? But it was written down there with some other, I think it was a bucket list. That was all the rage at the time. And I don't think I've achieved anything else on my bucket list that I wrote when I was 20, but I did achieve that Everest. And it was, writing it down, I think, suddenly made it from a vision to actually, this is something I need to do in real life.
I feel like you should look back at that list. I feel like now, as like the expert in going after your goals, there are some undiscovered opportunities on that list.
Potentially, it's like learn Spanish. Okay. Still haven't learned Spanish. It doesn't change.
It's there for a day. So you wrote it down. I know some people might have vision boards. Did you keep looking back at that statement? How did you keep that vision in your mind as something to work towards.
When I'm just thinking about my own goals in life, for me, there really has to be an emotional kind of attachment to the goal. Like, it means so much. To not achieve it would hurt me and would be so upsetting to me if I didn't get there somehow. And that's how Everest felt. You don't get a gold medal for reaching the top of Everest. You don't get a certificate. It's utterly pointless in some ways to go and climb a mountain. But just to know that you've put yourself through that and you've not given up, that was for me the goal. And so when I thought about standing on the summit, it was just about that feeling of having persevered. And it was just this very intrinsic motivation of just trying to prove something to myself. I found that with all goals in life for me. What's the intrinsic thing that's driving you? Okay, money's one thing and possessions and titles. But actually, if you just dig a little bit deeper and find out what really excites you, what would really make you proud, it's often something slightly different. Or it can be the same goal, but you're just motivating yourself in a slightly different way to get there.
And I like it, making this about something that you want to prove to yourself rather than it about being something you're trying to prove to other people as well. It sounded like it was much more you-centric, this goal you'd set for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there were a lot of people that told me, that's impossible. You'll never do that. People like us don't climb mountains like Everest. That really fired me up too, because I thought, I'll show you, So there is that element, I think, of that reverse psychology. When someone tells you can't do something, it actually can really put a fire in your belly. What I've learned in the long term is we often don't just succeed or fail. Often it's a little bit of both all the time. And the reason that we succeed and fail is because you're trying something really hard. And ultimately, if you're not failing, if you're not making mistakes, then you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough.
So how long was it between you attending that event where you got that kind of spark for the goal and then you standing on top of Everest? How long is that time period?
It was about 2 years.
So that's not a short period of time. And I know there will have been a huge amount of effort that's gone into that. But what were the milestones between the event and the summit that you could sort of plan your way to? And how important was it to have milestones?
The milestones were crucial, but they were in some ways laid out for me, if you like, because mountaineering, you can understand it very simply. The highest mountain, Everest, is the end result, right? So to get there, you've got to climb smaller mountains back to where you are right now. So when we are taking on more complex goals in life, those milestones aren't going to be so clear as like, oh, just the next highest mountain. I think the journey to Everest was quite straightforward in that sense because those milestones were so obvious. And now I reflect on it, I realise how key it is to have those little training peaks when you're working toward a goal that you need to tick off and you need to work towards in the short term, because if you're just working towards that one long-term goal and without any milestones to track your progress, you don't know how well you're doing. You don't know if you're on track time-wise. The 3 things that I had to pull into place were, number 1, I had to teach myself how to climb. Didn't know how to do that. Number 2, I had to find a team that I could go to Everest with, and I didn't know anyone in the climbing world. And thirdly, I had to find the money to climb the mountain, and it was about £50,000.
I'm really fascinated about how you did something so difficult that you really didn't have a lot of experience in. And you talked about that there was this intrinsic motivation that I will go after and do that. But I'm sure lots of other people will have goals they want to go after that represent things that they've not done before. How do you tune out the doubts that get in the way of the goal you're going after?
It's really difficult. And I think if you're working towards something really hard, you will want to quit. You will lose hope. You will actually probably quit. And it's okay. I think you have to ride those waves and accept that that's what being human's all about. We really do need to have those moments of hopelessness sometimes and a lack of confidence to then, hitting that low point then gives us that kick to go, no, I'm not going to give up here. I'm going to keep going. And for me, those lowest points when I lost confidence or had those doubts was when I had actually gotten back from climbing an 8,000 meter peak in the Himalayas. So I knew that I had the physical skills to climb Everest. I knew I had a team that I could go to Everest with, but I just didn't have the money to join the team. And we had 6 months or so from the training expedition to the actual Everest expedition. And I had to find £50,000 in that time. And I was looking for a corporate sponsor by making cold calls to British businesses, and just got rejection after rejection. And with every rejection, it was kind of proof to my loved ones, my family and friends back in Wokingham that, Bonnie, no one's ever going to give you this money. Wake up and realize, like, you're getting all these rejections. You're never going to be successful doing this. Why are you carrying on? And after a time, you start to think maybe everyone else is right. And ultimately, what I fell back on in those moments of being like, I quit, I can't do this anymore. I can't pick up the phone and make another embarrassing call. Why am I bothering to go training for a mountain I'm never going to climb because I'll never find the money? And it was in those moments where I think I allowed myself to feel sorry for myself. But then I would think, well, if this is it, if you're going to quit, what are you quitting on? And again, it was that vision. It was really in my heart, it was this realization that if I quit now in this moment, because I don't want to go for another training run, because I don't want to pick up the phone again, I am giving up on the chance to see the curvature of the earth with my team, stand on that summit. And it was visualization, again, that made me take that step back and see the bigger picture and remind myself of why I'd started. And so I think when you are setting goals and you have a big goal, it is so important to just keep checking in with why you started, keep checking in with the excitement that you had at the beginning, because once you've gotten through that beginner stage and you get down into like the small details, they will beat you down. And, it's the small things that in the positive and the negative way can make the biggest difference. The thing that I really held on to was my team that I had met and that I'd gone to climb my training peak for Everest with. They taught me this sort of philosophy really of success by smallness. And which was surprising for me because they were these great mountaineers, and I just thought that they would go with this attitude onto the mountain that you take on the whole peak and you can conquer the mountain. But it wasn't. It was like, there is so much uncertainty. Let's just focus on one step, one moment at a time, and let's just trust that the little steps that we take will add up. And I loved that, and it worked in the mountains. And so I guess in those moments of doubt, I just reminded myself, like, take a step back, remind yourself of the big picture, and just take the next small step and trust that will add up. And eventually it did. I got the money right at the last minute. And it really proved to me when I saw my bank account read £50,012 or something, that, the small things make the biggest difference, that having the clear vision makes the big difference. And having, I think, that perspective sometimes of just reminding yourself of why you started when the small things are beating you down was so key as well.
There's so much to learn from what you've just said, I think, as well as that piece on small things. The things that have really resonated with me was when you were really clear on what you needed to get to make your goal happen. You talked about, I needed some talent, I needed a team, and I needed some money, and you knew exactly how much money that you needed. And I think it takes this aspiration of a thing you want to achieve, and it sort of articulates, well, to make it happen, practically, these things need to happen. And I think that's really important for people to be honest about what needs to happen to get to where they want to go. And then also, I think it's so often that you hear about people who've done amazing things, like in work or outside of work and climbing mountains, and it looks so shiny. But to hear you say, no, it was hard, and there are times you want to quit, and that is normal. It's not always going to feel easy to do something that is actually quite difficult. I think it's just important that people, talk about more of what it takes to get those things, so that people who want to do it don't expect it all to be really easy.
I think it's a very human thing, as I said, to kind of go into moments of despair. It's completely normal. And I think actually those moments can motivate you, because when you're that close to quitting or that close to the edge, you allow yourself to sort of tiptoe over that line of it's over. Then you realize you don't actually want it, and it kind of gives you that kick that you need to carry on. And I also think one other really important thing that got me to Everest in the time frame that I did was knowing that, if I didn't get the money by this time, my team were going without me. Like, there was a serious deadline. I had to find that cash. And a lot of people were saying to me, well, the mountain will be there next year. you can still climb it next year. Why are you putting all this pressure on yourself to do it this year? And well, for me, it was, I won't get to go with my team if I leave it another year. But there was also just this feeling that if I kicked the can down the road and said to myself, I can always climb the mountain next year, I'd still be sitting here today saying I was going to climb that mountain. And there's a quote that I love by Leonard Bernstein, the composer. He said, to do great things, you need a clear plan and not enough time. And I think that is just so true. I didn't have enough time. And that in itself just put the fire in me every day to like get up, make the most of every second that I could to train, to make those calls, whatever it was. And if there was no deadline, I would have just let it go by the wayside. So yeah, having a deadline when you have a goal is just so important.
It shows you the power sometimes of constraints. Like you can either look at a constraint like a deadline as, oh, that's just made it harder, or you can say, well, that's made it helpful because now I've got something very specific to work towards. So deadlines helped you to stay accountable. What else? You've got the goal in mind, you've got this date that you're working towards. What else helps you, stay determined, stay accountable when you're going after the goal?
Other people were really key. Firstly, just for inspiration, Facebook was a very new thing at the time when I started climbing. And it was the first time really that you could just find someone on the internet and then directly send them a message. And I made great use of that. So I emailed all of these like legendary mountaineers when they set up their Facebook profiles, basically saying like, I love you, I want to be you. And can you give me advice? And, so I really found great support, great mentors that way. And it was just so inspiring to hear their stories and realize that they were human too, and that they had struggled with the same things that I was now struggling with. So I took, there was that. But on the flip side of it, because I then reached out and shared my goal with these people, there was like that level of accountability that I didn't want to then, fail in front of them. My team as well, they were expecting me to be there on Everest with them at the start of the season, and I didn't want to let my team down. And also it was a silly thing, but my auntie, we used to run together, and to leave her in the car park at 6 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't be bothered to get out of bed. If it was just me, I would have been like, oh, I can't go training this morning. It's too cold. It's dark. It's February. But because I knew she was there, I had to be there. So it's just silly, simple things like that, like having an accountability buddy. It's those small things, again, that can like make a huge difference.
Like a little bit of family guilt to drive a goal forward.
Yeah. And, we both didn't want to go. That was the thing, but we couldn't let each other down.
Yeah. And I think goals, maybe to some people, a goal can seem quite selfish because you are so determined, you're so focused on this thing that is important to you. But having an accountability partner who you're supporting at the same time suddenly makes this kind of going after a goal something that is bigger than you and more than you, and you're helping each other at the same time. It's a lovely idea. And so you're working towards a really big goal, Everest in your point. Are you kind of waiting to celebrate until you're at the top of that summit, or do you think it's important that along the way you recognise sort of the smaller wins you're achieving and you're working towards?
It was absolutely crucial to take those moments, especially at the end of a long climbing day, like on the Lhotse face, for instance. This huge mountain face, one of the biggest mountain faces on the planet. And when you look up, the summit of Everest is like disappearing into the heavens, into the clouds, and you can't breathe because you're at 7,000 meters altitude. And then you look down from there, seeing how far you've got to go, and you like the next step. The idea of lifting up my foot and placing it in front of me is going to cause me so much pain. Like my heart wants to burst out of my chest. I can barely lift my leg. My leg is screaming at me for oxygen. I can't give it. But you take that little step and you look back up and the mountain's still the same size. And it's in those moments where you just think, how am I ever going to get there if it hurts this much now? And it's so easy to get into those spirals of fretting and just feeling like you'll never be able to overcome like the pain that this is going to ask of you. Getting to the tent each night and then turning around, looking down the mountain, looking down the Lhotse face and seeing all of our little footsteps in the ice and snow, it gave you suddenly that perspective again of like, oh my gosh, all those painful steps when they felt like I was getting nowhere, they add up.
So you've talked about the importance of the team in achieving this goal. How did that team come together to help you to make it happen?
The interesting thing about mountaineering is it's quite difficult to get into. It's expensive. So your teams end up being sometimes quite a mishmash of people from all different cultures all over the world. You arrive at base camp, maybe you've never even climbed together before. And in that moment at base camp when we arrived, it was really important, I think, on reflection, our leader, Kenton Cool, he just set like very clear parameters about what the goals were for this trip. And he said the number one thing that we need to achieve is we need to all come home alive and safe. That is more important than getting to the summit. And I think the thing is, we know that. You're sort of in the back of your mind, it's important to come home alive. But it was him saying it and making it really clear so that we all, with every decision we then made as a team, we knew what the main goal was, and that was to come home safe. And I think with a team, if you have a really clear goal, then that's the number one most important thing. You've communicated it really well. But more importantly, when you're then, in the hard part of working towards it and you're suffering and it's stressful, it's the thoughtfulness that can just bring you back together. It's the little things, looking after each other, thinking before you speak and act. So I really learned from them just the power of thoughtfulness, the power of clear communication, and knowing exactly what the goal is that we're all working towards.
Looking after yourself when you're going after a goal is actually important for other people as well, whether that's kind of mental or physical or sleep. So how else for you, sleep, food, how else did you look after yourself so you were able to get towards that goal?
Well, I say that resilience comes from rest. We spend more than 50% of our time lying in the tents resting. But then because we've rested well, because we've had to allow those physiological changes in our bodies to take place, our adaptation to altitude, so we're growing new red blood cells when we're resting, it means that when we do climb, we can then push ourselves really to a limit, and we then keep going up toward the death zone above 8,000 meters. And the only way that we can build our resilience to get to the dead zone is by taking like these really big rest days, and rest 3 days sometimes. So we actually don't just start at base camp and go straight to the summit of Everest, because we would burn out and die. You can't just endlessly push yourself on up these big mountains. You have to go up a little bit, expose yourself to, a new height. It's horrible. You're really at the limit. You can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't breathe. And then you come back to base camp and you rest and you recover and you re-nourish. And then the next time you go on the mountain, your high point is now easy. So you can now push on to the next high point where you go through the same cycle. And I think there's a great lesson in there with working toward a big goal, a long-term goal of looking after yourself. Is resilience, of course, comes from pushing yourself, to do that, to go beyond. Of course, it does. But there's the other side of resilience, which we don't talk about enough, which is rest. And resting well as well. And the amount of times that I have seen on many peaks, climbers collapse into tents at the end of a long, hard day, feeling really proud of themselves, and fall asleep with their boots out of the tent still. And then you sort of peek out a few hours later and you can hear the snores and the person's still there. I have even heard climbers outside my tent at night eating snow because they've finally woken up disorientated with no head torch or anything, and have just had to eat what they could find on the ground. So, that is not what you want to be. But how often in life are we scrambling around, just trying to kind of we're not thinking about eating well, we're not resting well, we're just going full pelt and then collapsing at the end of the day. And it just creates this downward spiral where if you don't rest well and actually, be mindful about how you rest, then you're going to end up in a bad place and you're going to burn out. And you see it in the mountains, you see it in life.
I also think there's something quite nice in what you said there about the idea of looking for the feet outside of the tent. So we talked a lot about how individuals go after goals, but, helping other people at work. Is there someone whose feet are outside of the tent? Is there someone where you can see someone is tired, or you can see someone is not taking a rest, and then maybe being that person, if they're not seeing it for themselves, being the person that spots that and says actually, maybe just call it quits today, come back tomorrow, you'll be better for it. I think it's actually a really nice thing that we can do for each other so that everybody's increasing their performance as well.
You're so right. But the thing is, you don't want to, sometimes I'm looking over at mountaineers that are legends in my eyes. And I'm thinking, who am I to go over and tell him what to do? But the next day, when I can see he's really struggling on the peak, you think, I wish I'd had the courage to say, like, you need to get in your tent. But, you know, because there's that hierarchy sometimes. You don't want to tell someone how to do what they already know. But the truth is that people often, you know, as you said, we're all human. We know what the right thing to do is, but we don't always do it. And sometimes it does need, as you said, someone else to just go, look, you need to take some better rest or whatever. It's often the hardest thing to reach out and say that, but people do need to hear it.
In our previous episode, we talked about feedback and sometimes how hard that can be. So it could be useful for people to listen to that, maybe get some ideas, because I think particularly feedback to people that maybe are more senior than you or might feel like a difficult conversation is an important skill to learn. So Bonita, if we were going to take our conversation and turn it into 3 actions for our listeners to take away, what would those actions be?
Set goals for yourself that are big and scary, because I wrote down on my bucket list, learn Spanish, and I still haven't achieved it because it wasn't big and scary enough and exciting enough. Your goals should be a big stretch for you. Dare yourself to write things down that you know, make you feel awkward and kind of think like, I can't write that, write it. For me was the moment when I wrote down Everest. I just thought, oh my God, I'm serious about this. And it wasn't until I'd written it down that I realized that. So definitely write down the big, hairy, scary goal. There is actually data that says you're something like 40% more likely to achieve a goal that you've written down. My second one would be the accountability. Find a buddy that doesn't want to do it either, but because you've committed to, you know, setting the weekly check-ins or these things that you do on a weekly basis, non-negotiable thing that you're just going to do and you commit to it. I think that's really key. And then finally, I think I just remember that philosophy of success by smallness that my team taught me. The way that you achieve goals is by focusing on the process, and the progress sort of looks after itself. When you focus on the small things, you need to take those moments to look back and see how far you've come. So you need reflection, you need milestones along the way so that you know how well you're doing, and you need a deadline so that you're not just going to kick the can down the road.
Well, I know what I'm doing after this conversation. I'm getting a scary, hairy goal. That's definitely happening. One last thing before we let you go from today's conversation. The next episode, we're going to be focusing on habits, and we like to ask our guests, give us some insights before we go into that next conversation. So what is a habit that has helped you perform at your best in your career?
I like habit stacking, actually. I'm a busy mum. I've got a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old, self-employed, so I'm spinning many plates all the time. I find it really difficult to set new habits that can't already fit into my routine. One that I really love is, like, you know, on the school run, I'm going to make sure I run my children to school every day.
Oh, you literally do the school run?
Yeah, literally run to school. And then sort of check-ins as well. So once the kids have gone to sleep, instead of just immediately sitting on the sofa and watching the TV, you know, that's my time to go to my laptop and work on that project that I'm working on or whatever. I say to myself, if you sit here for 5 minutes and you write one thing, then you can have the biggest bar of chocolate and you can watch all of that Netflix series. But of course, once you sat there for 5 minutes, you're in a flow, and you then do 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour, whatever it is. And you don't always need the full bar of chocolate, but just offering that massive reward, outsized reward for the smallest amount of effort, I find can sometimes be the difference between like getting it done and not getting it done. So yeah, those are the habits.
Outsized rewards for small efforts. I'm very into that.
To build new habits, especially, you need massive rewards for very little work, I think. And that really helps me.
That's brilliant advice. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant to listen and learn from you, Bonita.
Thank you.